Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today we are doing Ask Me Almost Anything, a full session of Ask Me Almost Anything about the art, the craft, or the business of writing for screens, screenwriting. I am here every Monday through Friday, if I can do it, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Most of the time I will be working on our ongoing writing step-by-step project in which I am showing people how I write a script. But right now we are just going to take a full session to open it up to questions, answer some that have already been handed in, but also anything that happens live happens live. If for some reason you are not watching this live, if you, for instance, have a life of your own, you can still ask me a question. Many of these questions that I will be dealing with today came from writingforscreens.com. Contact me. Also, I am happy to take questions in the comments of this very video or any video. Just ask me. The comment goes directly to my attention. Today, our first question comes from Wolf Powers, a regular watcher, and he asked about the difference, my thoughts on the differences between a serialized and episodic series. This is a great question. It's a cool topic. If Wolf is not here now, hopefully he will be soon. Oh, and there he is, Wolf Powers. I am getting to your question, which started because we were talking about old horror TV series, and I mentioned Kolchak, the Night Stalker, which was sort of a monster of the week kind of show. And you asked me to talk about the differences between creating a serialized show like the one that we're working on in the Untitled Podcaster Killer Project, or a more episodic show. And I think that that's actually a really big, good, complex question, so I wanted to take a hunk of time to answer it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is where this stuff comes from. Remember, these shapes of art forms do not come from some abstract, pure, platonic form of art. It's not like there is a form of story that is episodic that is in nature. There ain't no such thing. You're welcome. And hello, 99 Precinct. So here's the deal. The shapes of art, the forms of art, they come from the history of art. In this case, the art is film history, TV history, but any art, this is true. If you want to learn the art, if you want to learn the craft, the structure, all of that, you should study the history of the art. These forms developed for reasons. They developed for reasons partly to do with the mechanics of the distribution of the art and also the business of it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about the actual different forms of TV currently. The first thing you have to know is that when TV started and episodes and series were invented, they were based in a couple of things. First of all, they were based in radio, and they were also based in theater. Those were the current art forms that the people working in this were working in. It was basically a radio with pictures. They had already created serialized radio stories, which they did great. They're actually really cool if you want to get into them. And now in the era of podcasting, understanding old radio theater is an amazing resource. Once again, I just cannot urge you enough. If you want to understand the art that you are doing, you should study the history of it. Don't just look at the easy stuff, the stuff that's happening in your time. Go to the stuff that's a little less accessible. The language and form of the earlier shape of the art, the earlier times of the art, you will be amazed what you can learn from it. For instance, radio and television were paid for by commercials. Unlike a movie, you pay for your ticket and then there's a show and you've already paid for it. The way that broadcasting worked was the people who were making it got the money from advertisers who were trying to reach the audience, which was receiving the product for free. And that makes a big difference in how shows are shaped, because they needed to put the ads in the show. If they put the ads between the shows, no one's going to watch them. So what they would do is they had commercial breaks. And that has changed or created the format of the network TV show. This whole idea of act breaks, when you see a TV script and there are act breaks, the reason those are acts is because they had a commercial. And in order to market, they called it an act like it was like an act in a play or something. It's not. It's a commercial section. It's a section before we advertise. And what they wanted to do was make sure that you had a reason to stick around for the commercial and not change the channel, because that's another technological difference between television and almost every other entertainment screen form. If you're in the movie theater, you're not going to change the channel. You're not going to walk out and go into the next theater. I mean, some people do, but if you're in a play, you can't just say, oh, this play is boring, let me switch to another play. So they didn't have to worry. You committed when you came in to trying to watch the whole thing. When you're watching broadcast stuff, you can just change the channel. This means that they work very hard to keep you hooked when they break. And that is the basis for the structure of television shows. Likewise, the teaser or cold open. That was something that was invented in order to get people who were watching one show to watch the one that was coming next. At the end of the program that you were watching, you're like, well, should I watch this next thing? I don't know what it is. There had to be something really hooky at the beginning to make you want to watch it. Got some more people here. Hello, Kirby. Hello, OVG. OVG. So great to see all of you. Dream Phaser, welcome. Have you changed your icon? Anyway, so I'm talking about the shape of TV episodes, the structure of a series, and so all of these things that they were doing were trying to hype the hookiness of the show because they knew you could change the channel. That's great. Actually, it makes for some great storytelling. It also can get exhausting, and also it can damage slow burn, character development. A lot of other things get knocked out of the way by the need to have a whiz-bang hook every 10 minutes. The other big thing was television. When they invented it, you couldn't watch it later. If you didn't catch it, you missed it. There was no way to record or select what show you were going to watch. This sounds like a dumb thing, but it makes a huge difference because they had to assume that, they had to assume that you had not seen all of the other episodes, so they could not write serialized stories. There was such a thing as a soap opera. Soap operas were geared to a sort of captive audience. The theory of soap operas is they were daytime TV or daytime radio, and the idea was that the housewives were listening and that they were always home in the day, so you could count on them to tune in 5 days a week at that time to catch the story. That is why soap operas were serialized and almost no other television was until the 1980s. So with all that said, they created a bunch of different formats, and then those developed when it became possible to record shows, with the VCR, the video cassette recorder, followed by the DVD player, when you couldn't record it, but you could buy a season and watch the whole season. The beginning of binging. And then having created this new form, this bingeable form of storytelling, that happened to coincide with the development of pay cable. Pay cable was when you paid a subscription for your cable show, and therefore there were no commercials and there were no advertisers. You could do things on cable TV that you could not do on broadcast TV. Because broadcast was going openly to the public, anyone could see it, there were very, very strict government regulations on what you could and could not show or say. And cable, because you were paying and you're saying, I agree to see this, even if it's got naked people or violence, that blew open that part of storytelling, because all of a sudden you could, A, tell long stories that people were going to watch on DVD or reruns, and all sorts of new storytelling subjects became possible. So what this all comes down to is there are now a bunch of basic series types. I'm going to go through them one by one. There's the anthology. There's the episodic or procedural. There's what I like to call the procedural plus. It's a name I made up. There's serialized, and there's the limited series. So let's take these one at a time and talk about them. An anthology show. Anthology show is a collection. Anthology means a collection of stories in which there is usually a framework. For instance, Twilight Zone. Alfred Hitchcock presents, back in the old days, there were also these playhouse dramas. In other words, there would be essentially a play for the week. There were like 60 to 90 minutes, and it would be called General Electric Playhouse or Nabisco Playhouse. And therefore, you could do all sorts of different stories because they were contained. You watched it one. Now there are Black Mirror. There's a show I have not watched, but I've heard good things about, called Tokyo Midnight Diner, I believe, on Netflix. There is Modern Love on Amazon, which is a really interesting case because it is an anthology of love stories, but there's also some weaving together of elements. Cool thing that streaming is inventing. Okay, so the thing you need for an anthology show is you need some form of binding element. It can be just, this is General Electric, we're putting on plays, there's going to be all sorts of different plays, come see what we've got. But usually there's a theme. Black Mirror is sort of the nightmare of technology. Modern Love is stories about love in our times. So whatever it is, the anthology generally has something which makes people say, oh, I will choose to check out that anthology. Sometimes it's just classy anthology. Sometimes it's just a tone. But an anthology series is basically just a collection of stories. The good thing about that is you don't need to think about or write a whole season. You're just doing the one act, the one beginning, middle, and end. Then there is the episodic or procedural series. Okay, now that is when you've got like a Law and Order, CSI. Sitcoms actually are episodic. In other words, you've got an ongoing situation, a premise, a location or group that gives you a theme. For instance, lawyers or detectives or doctors or a family of two divorced people who have their 3 kids each, and so therefore you've got a family full of blended elements. Or an odd couple, 2 divorced guys, one of whom is sloppy and one of whom is hyper neat. Whatever the premise is, then you have episodes which have a beginning, middle, and end, and you do not alter the basic structure of the premise. The detective rarely will change jobs in the middle of an episodic series. The framework of the series allows for a series of stories, and the main characters encounter new people every week who have a story which they resolve in some way by the end of the series. That is what an episodic, or sometimes called procedural in certain cases, procedural in the sense that you're following the procedure. You're following the process by which doctors solve a medical case, or lawyers take on a legal case, or detectives solve a crime. Now, the good thing about this for the people who are writing it is you got a beginning, middle, and end. You need to introduce all the facts, lay out all the characters, show the thing, have a little twist or two, and then get out by the end of the half hour or hour. It creates a formula which is comforting for the audience. So one of the things about procedurals is there's a certain sense of reassurance in procedurals. You know that the main characters are not going to die. You know that the hospital is not going to become a dry cleaners. There's a sense of comfort to something episodic, to something procedural. No matter how difficult the marriage of Lucy and Ricky and I Love Lucy, they're not getting divorced. The tension within it is comforting because it makes for fun, but it never actually destabilizes the series. So that's the key to an episodic show, a procedural show. Then there is the procedural plus. That's the third one, the middle one right in our list. And I made up that name to explain, to categorize a type of procedural where there is a case per week, but there is also an ongoing larger plot. For instance, the X-Files. Scully and Mulder were working on a large conspiracy that had deep personal meaning to Mulder, but they often, because of their job and because of their attempts to follow this conspiracy, they were encountering supernatural or weird events of all sorts, most of which you meet a character, you meet a problem, you deal with it, and then you're gone. And there may be a little hint or two, a scene or two during that beginning, middle, and end, which relates to the larger series story, but mainly it's case per week. And what they would do, something like The X-Files, The Good Wife, House, The Fugitive way back when, these were shows where they would balance a sense that you were following the big story, but you also got the comfort of episodic. You got the comfort of the case per week. And that's a cool challenge because you have to be constantly balancing how much time do I give to the big story and how much time do I give to the beginning, middle, and end in an hour. If you do it right, it's intensely satisfying because you have a long-term relationship with the main characters, but you also get the kick of a new thing every week and the satisfaction of solving it every week. Then we get to Serialized. Serialized has taken over the world. Ever since DVD, but especially since streaming, networks tend to prefer serialized shows. And the reason is because they are asking you, if you start it, you're not going to stop until you're done. You are not going to watch one or two of the 13 episodes. You need to watch the whole season in order to get any real satisfaction out of it. So what happens is the bingeability of series became very important because the goal of a streaming service is to keep you watching the streaming service. That is their reason for being. The more people that they can get to say, I'm going to turn on the device because I want entertainment and I will go to this outlet because that's where the good shows are. That's what they want, and which is very different from a network which is saying, we actually have to please the advertisers. We have to choose our shows based on the group they want to advertise to. The streaming services are saying, what can we do to hook certain different demographics? What can we do to stand out from other shows? But the structure of the show is not based in the desire to get advertisements out to people. The writing element of a serialized is that you're writing chapters of a story. It is really the same as telling simply a 17-hour story or a 68-hour story or a 6-hour story. You are telling a story in which you have to have something which will keep you involved throughout the entire thing and yet develops satisfyingly in each section as well. Serialized stories tend to be heavier on B stories, C stories, D stories, complex subplots, complex relations to time and backstory. All of these things become possible when you are serialized and you have that much room to work in. You are telling your story in a 10-hour season. You have more time, more scenes to develop characters. You have more steps in their story. It's not just beginning, middle, low point, end. There's all sorts of travels they're going to make. So serialized encourages writers to develop deeper characters, more complex stories. But in order to do it, you need to have the entire plan ready when you start. You can't write the first episode and not know where it's going. And you can, but it's likely to be like Lost, which lost a lot of people as it went along. For all of those who were having fun with the kicks, Lost was actually at the sort of turning point when the television industry was trying to figure out how serialized to be. And so notoriously, the people who wrote Lost did not know what they were getting themselves into. They just wanted to get something hooky, and they said, we'll figure it out later. Some people are happy with that, some people are not. Anyway, so the final category in going from anthology, which is the most scattered, to limited series is the most coherent single unit writing, because a limited series has all the advantages of a series, of a serialized series, in the sense that it's demanding complex, long plotting with character development, but it also, you're getting an ending that ends. When you're doing a serialized series, you have to end your season, but you can't end it in a conclusive way because you might want to have another season. And very often when people are creating shows, they don't know if they're going to have another season. So they're in this weird bind where they have to have a satisfying ending, and yet at the same time, they need to make it possible for the story to further develop. Eventually, the networks and the streamers began to recognize that this was an impossible artistic challenge, and they began to try to tell creators, you have 2 more seasons, you have 1 more season. Now and then, something like Ray Donovan recently on Showtime or Deadwood, there was a change of plan. And so the last season wasn't intended to be the last season. And there's all these cliffhangers, which really frustrated the hell out of people and resulted in making a movie. They said, okay, we don't want to pay for a whole other series. We don't want to commit. I mean, you have to remember, a season of a show is an extraordinary commitment of time and money. People work 6 to 8 months on a show. That's really hard to get big talent to say, I'm going to give up most of a year. If they could do movies and do 2 or 3 a year, if they so chose. And furthermore, it's like $100 million to do one of these things, to do a season of a drama series. It's incredibly expensive. Wait, we've got a new... Dawn is here. Hello. Glad you are enjoying the channel. And Dawn says hello to everyone else, which is really fun. Okay, so my point is, a limited series, when you're talking about types of series, the limited series is serialized and has a definitive ending. at the end of this season of this series, you are going to be done. Now and then they will make a sequel. Big Little Lies, for instance, was just so popular, and the people involved said, we'll do another. And I think the second season was great. But each one, in theory, was supposed to be end of story. So that is the potential possible structures of a series as I am laying it out. You can go from anthology, which is just a collection of different things, all the way through to limited series, which is essentially one big, long object, story object broken into chapters. I hope that helps to lay out the possibilities. The question then is, how do you do it? And partly the answer is, you got to study that form. If you're doing the anthology, obviously there are very different rules and requirements to what you're going to have to accomplish in an episode than if you're doing a serialized, where you have to attend to all of the major characters. If you've got an ensemble serialized show, you may have 6 or 7 major characters plus a bunch of subplots, and you have to make sure that they don't fall out for too long. It's a complex balancing act, and the answer is, you have to study the genre you are working in and figure out how other people have played the game, because there is no strict set of rules for any of this. That would be like saying, how do you paint a painting? Well, is it a painting of a person, a painting of a landscape, or the painting of a pot of flowers? Obviously, different things are going to be involved. So once again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Study the history of the art you want to make. Don't just study what's happening now. Learn how people did it before, if no other reason than because it's such a great goldmine of things to steal. If you steal something from a silent movie, I guarantee you, no one's going to know. You still have to make it your own, but the toolbox that you are opening up when you look into the art form as a whole instead of just your preferred part of it is unbelievable. If you love science fiction, watch some westerns, watch some musicals, watch all sorts of different forms to see how they structure, how they present characters, all the different tricks of the trade. If you want to be in an art, you should study the history of the art. Even if it's weird, even if it's inaccessible, even if it's old-fashioned, you'll be amazed at what you can learn. Okay. That was our first question. I see some other questions. I want you to know, Kirby and OVG, that I do see your questions and I'm going to get to them. But first I want to get to a quickie here about documentaries. I got a question through the website from Matt Adams, who is making a documentary. He's doing a documentary on archaeological sites. And so what he basically asked is, how does this storytelling stuff that you're trying to teach relate to documentaries? And I thought that's actually an interesting question, because I do think some of it relates and other does not at all. One of the main things is a documentary does not have to be organized by character. A documentary can be organized by ideas, by places, by topic. You can say, I'm going to tell the story of this college. You can tell I'm going to do the story of this season, the 1919 baseball scandal. Whatever topic you decide, or you can say, I'm going to do a documentary about baking. Then you're organizing by ideas. And what you need to do is I believe you need to make an outline. You make a list of things you're trying to cover, partly because that will help in your research and partly will help in your planning of interviews and things like that. The other thing about documentaries is you don't write it first and then shoot it. You write, shoot. You're constantly doing all of the creative work creating and inventing and editing in a kind of wash cycle where you do some of it, then you dry it out and you look at it and you do more. And the other thing that makes documentaries different is you are not creating the subject. You are exploring or discovering or interpreting a real thing, a fact, a truth. And therefore, your story is guided by that. You can't just say, I've decided I want to tell the story about how sea explorers actually went to space if they didn't do it. So what I would say is the first thing you want to do is decide if your documentary is telling a story. It may not. It may be a progress unfolding a series of ideas. It may be an argument. It may be a story of a place in the sense of a history. If that is the case, you can ask the storytelling questions I'm teaching in terms of the topic you are trying to tell. If it is about a group of people who did a thing, then those people did have reasons, they did take actions, and therefore all those storytelling questions the 6 questions and things like that, the process of questions, those questions are relevant. But that will depend on what your documentary is about and the form you want to give it. And that leads to one other important thing, which is someone asked, essentially, is this the right way to use your questions? The other videos I've made, like the process of questions, that's something I need to make really clear. These are not rules. They are tools. They are things you can try to use to figure out the rules that you are going to set for your work. Your work is going to be decided by the genre you're in and the artistic vision you have and the business plan of what you're trying to accomplish with it and your own instincts and the things that you love that made you want to do it in the first place. All of those things, they will determine the rules that you have to play by. These questions are just the things that I have found useful when you are following your own rules. They're not rules unto yourself. If you don't answer these questions, if you don't answer them all the way that I said, doesn't matter. It's not like you can't write a great story without thinking about these questions at all. You really need to think about anything I'm teaching you is simply a tool or a skill that you will use by your feelings and instincts and artistic desires. That, I believe, is what an artist has to do. And that is what I believe a good art teacher should teach, is don't look at me. I don't know what you want to do. I don't know what kind of work you idealize, what kind of feelings you want to express. That is what makes it art. That is why it is not auto mechanics, because you are not just following a plan and building a thing that has already been done. You are doing a thing that no one has ever done, and you have to do it your way. The only things I am teaching is tools which may be useful that you may not have thought of. The decades of work I have done taught me these tricks, and that is literally what they are. Things that I saw someone else do or that I found helpful when I was trying to sort out a story or a series. So that brings us to the end of my prepared questions, which means I get into the chat questions. I'm going to take a quick second here to skim them because I can't talk and read at the same time, so I often don't know what you guys are saying in the chat. One thing, Wolf is happy with the answer. Cool. Yay. Okay. All right. Oh, cool. No one's fighting. Here's the deal. This is really important. And I will just stop doing these altogether if the chat gets ugly. You must not be mean to each other in the chat or in the comments. Just that simple. Rules of civilization absolutely apply here. So let's see what the questions are. When it comes to outlining or plotting your season for your show, is it best to have a season level goal in mind when doing it? Mostly, yes. Not entirely. Some great shows were created in an era in which that was not permitted. In other words, they would not, the way that television was made for decades was they would say, you get a pilot. If the pilot goes well, you get a bunch of episodes ordered. In other words, we will pay you to have a staff and make 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever it is. And then if that gets decent ratings, we will pay for the rest of a season. A season at the time was 22 to 26 because it was half a year. It took that long to make them. And if you did reruns, that was a year's worth of television. So the answer is many great shows did not have a big plan. They were just, let's set up a premise and then we can just riff eternally. And you can still do that. But as we were talking about with the different forms of series, if you are at all serialized, if you are not just doing an episodic, here's a hospital, let's see what cases show up, then yes, it is important to have a plan for the show, a plan for the season and a plan for the series. That can be very general. Notoriously, famously, Vince Gilligan has said that when he went to AMC with the plan for Breaking Bad, it was essentially, I want to take, as he put it, Mr. Chips and make him, to the end, he's going to become Scarface. Mr. Chips was a beloved teacher in an old English school in a series of books and movies called Goodbye, Mr. Chips, the beloved high school teacher. And what he said is, I want to take Mr. Chips and get him to where he's Scarface. His basic premise was simply, I know that I'm going to start with Walter. He's going to be a high school teacher who becomes a meth cook, and then meth dealer, and then meth kingpin. And by the end, there's a lot of killing, and it's tragic and horrifying. And he did not know exactly how he was going to get from that place to that place. Vince Gilligan and his crew were, his staff of writers, were experienced enough in the process of writing a show that they did not need to know 100% where every step of the way was going to be. They just knew by the end of season 1, we want to get to murders. We want to get to a sense of Walter becoming a monster. And so therefore they plotted out, I think it's only 6 episodes in the first season. But as I've said before, they also planned to end it with Jesse's death. They thought Jesse was going to die at the end of season 1, and then they changed their plan. So the answer is, do you plan out everything? Depends. Then you take something like Mr. Robot, a brilliantly intricate show, 4 seasons. I don't know if he knew that he would have 4, but he certainly had a plan for the whole. And season 1 has an interesting ending because it satisfies one part of the story. So that in theory, if it stopped then, it would be a cool ending, but a lot of stuff would not be explored. And by the time you get to the end of the 4 seasons, you recognize that there were things planted there in case they could go there that were paid off only 4 seasons later. So the question was, is it best to have a season level goal in mind when plotting your show? I would say almost always yes. It just helps. It always, for me, helps to know where you're going. Unless you are essentially doing jazz writing, unless you're saying, I'm going to improvise and I have confidence in my skills in improvising. I got a negative. I got a thumbs down and I don't know why. So if you get a chance, let me know. Okay. So next question. For nonlinear storytelling, how do you make it work? It's fairly more interesting to watch. Yes. Remember, nonlinear storytelling does not mean there isn't a story. It just means it's being told not in chronological order. That's really the only thing about nonlinear. When they say nonlinear, they don't actually mean like it's like not English. It's like the characters are not behaving in a linear pattern. They're just plotting it in an unconventional way. So therefore, I think that it's important to remember nonlinear storytelling is just storytelling. It's just telling the story out of chronological order because there are revelations that you can make, or that you believe the audience is sophisticated enough to be able to connect the dots and recognize that things are being told in a more complicated series of unveilings. And nowadays, audiences mostly are. So the answer is, for nonlinear storytelling, once again, the thing I can most emphasize is study the art. Look at all of the examples of really fine nonlinear storytelling, of which Mr. Robot, by the way, super, plus of which the pilot of Breaking Bad. Amazingly nonlinear, brilliantly done, because in doing the nonlinear, you can often, when you're telling the story of someone starting in one place and ending in another, you don't necessarily have a way to tell the audience, hey, this is going to get wild at the end. And so therefore, you take a hunk of the end and put it in the beginning. And then the audience is saying, how did we get there? And that creates suspense. That's the point of nonlinear. The other reason that you do nonlinear sometimes is because it can reflect the nature of our minds. Remember, our minds often go nonlinear. Often our minds will be traveling based on emotional connections, not on chronological order. Annie Hall. Yes, Woody Allen is problematic, but Annie Hall is a remarkable piece of filmmaking in which he is considering his relationship, the character is considering his relationships, connecting them and balancing them in totally nonlinear ways. If you don't want to watch Woody Allen, cool. I do not in any way condemn that. I support it. I understand it. But 500 Days of Summer, another magnificent piece of nonlinear romantic storytelling. If you're telling in a series, tons of them. I've mentioned Bloodline. The first season is nonlinear. Many things now are nonlinear. Let's see what else. I wonder you can write a character who's completely unempathetic, as we want the evil character to suffer for their actions, like Clockwork Orange. Alex, I would disagree with that one. I don't think Alex is unempathetic. Well, that's interesting. Is he unempathetic to others? Yes. Is he a sociopath? Yeah, mostly. And yet, in the course of the story, we actually begin to have empathy for him. I believe the answer would be that you need to think about why they are unempathetic. In the case of Clockwork Orange, you're talking about a character who has been essentially alienated, depersonalized by the society he is in. His parents' weakness, the cruelty of the school system, the lack of economic meaningfulness in their world. There's a lot of things that are presented in which, therefore, Alex has only his most primitive instincts to go on. The only thing that he can rely on and the only thing that he can feel from are ultra violence and the old and out. He is a creature of sex, violence, and personal hungers. And what we are going to see is that unempathetic character is still a person. And one of the things I think that it's important to remember is in doing so, he also is connecting with our desires to break the rules or to watch someone breaking the rules. Let me, oh gosh, we're just racing here. Okay. I am going to, sorry, I'm catching up on the chat because I don't read and talk at the same time. nonlinear exception Memento. Obviously, Memento is brilliantly done. I have to say, nonlinear storytelling. I think the other important thing to know about the nonlinear storytelling is the difference between plot and story. And the way I define that is story is what happens to the people, because our lives are linear. It's really important to remember that. Everybody's story, it's linear. We had a linear experience of living day to day. The way that story is told is the plot of the artwork. So the thing to remember about the nonlinear storytelling is it is telling the story of a linear experience. And so there is always a linear component to a nonlinear story. Is that entirely true with something like a Terrence Malick late movie? I kind of think so. I mean, I haven't seen all of them, but Tree of Life certainly has a linear component in its nonlinear storytelling. Am I getting too heady for you guys? I'm just going. This is what happens when you ask me anything. How do I create a compelling and engaging conflict? First, you watch all of my videos, because I go into this in great detail when I talk about dramatic action and character arcs. And also, I would just highly recommend Take Art Apart, which tells you how to figure it out. The answer is, for me, almost always, we care about what the person wants. It's bizarre and irrational to me how much this works. If you can figure out like what Alex wants is to rape and pillage and steal and beat. And that seems like we should not like it. It seems like we should hate Alex, but we don't hate Alex. We don't even hate him at the beginning, partly because he's in conflict with other people. And there is a period at the beginning of Clockwork Orange when we hate him, which is interesting because we turn on him. But before the terrible rape at home, we kind of like watching Alex. Obviously, not everyone does, but most of us will say there is something liberating about Alex's refusal to follow the rules. So the answer is, how do we engage a compelling conflict? You have two people and they want things that are getting in each other's way. Just that simple. It does not have to be outright conflict. Some conflict is subtle. There's a movie called Remains of the Day. It is brilliantly understated. The levels of conflict are almost invisible and yet so powerful. There are so many. Better Call Saul there's a huge amount of understated manipulation and conflict between characters. I believe that all engagement in stories tends to come from the passion that you feel for the subject you're writing about and your ability to put that into the situation of a character who wants something. Just that simple. If you can tell us what the character wants, you'd be amazed how much we'll go with it. Okay, by the way, it's fascinating to me that you guys are like talking in the chat. I find this just so cool. How does one know when a story should begin? I'm trying to write a story about a character's life and I can't decide whether to start it when he was a child, an old man, or a teen. There is no right answer to this. The answer is you decide based on what's most important, because the ending kind of determines the beginning. If you know what you're trying to end with, what vision, what feeling, what action is going to end it, that can often help you to decide how to begin it. But then it's going to be a matter of personal preference. You can tell someone's life from beginning to end. Many stories have done that. The danger you risk is that it takes a long time to get going. And so often, if there's something that is in the beginning that is going to be important, but can be exposed by the actions in the middle, start in the middle, and have it come out in a confession, in an argument, in a series of actions, or a slideshow. There are so many ways to tell us what's going on in people's hearts. There is no right answer, except you know it from how you feel the most important and engaging way to tell the story is. And the other way to tell the important thing is that you have to decide what version of things you have liked. Can you find a movie or a show that does this the way you like it? Sort of borrow from that. There are great stories that start with somebody's childhood and follow them all the way through. And there are great stories that condense it all into a weekend, and yet we understand their whole life without even having flashbacks sometimes. There is not a right answer. How you know, because that's really your question. How do you know? You know from finding a model or a series of models, other things. Once again, take art apart. Look at work that you like that has done something similar and see how they did it. And then you can do that too. And the other way you decide is by deciding what you feel as your audience self. What do you want to experience? That's it. That's how you decide. The art of art is to follow your impulses, your instincts. There is no right or wrong. There is just different ways to do it. If you have some idea that you've never seen anyone do, cool, experiment, try it, see how it works. Most of the time, you are going to be working from things you have liked. Yes, your question made perfect sense. Breaking Bad was amazing. Yes, it truly was. And Kirby, say thanks. I have gone almost an hour. I have to stop. People have I can't imagine people watching this whole thing. But you know what? I hope you do. I hope you ask me questions. Please, in the comments, you can ask a question. If you don't want it to be public, you can ask me privately by going to contact me at writingforscreens.com, and I will get the question. So, everybody, have yourself a great night. I will be back. Next episode, we'll be getting back into the Untitled Podcaster Killer project. So long.